Hi there, and welcome to Baseball by Design. I'm SportsLogos.net minor league baseball correspondent Paul Caputo, broadcasting live, as always, from the Helmet Sunday Hall of Fame in my basement in Fort Collins, Colorado. We're talking today about one of my absolute favorite brands in minor league baseball, the Kannapolis Cannon Ballers, Single-A affiliate of the Chicago White Sox in Kannapolis, North Carolina. I'm so excited for this episode. I'm going to be speaking with Alicia Amling, who is the director of Temerity Baseball, which owns the Cannon Ballers. I'm going to be speaking with my good friend Dan Simon, who created this brand, one of my favorite of Dan's brands. And I'm going to be speaking with David the Bullet Smith, who is the actual human cannonballer himself. So I'm really excited for this episode. First up is Alicia Amling with Temerity Baseball. Alicia, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for loving our brand as much as we do.
Your brand is so much fun. It's honestly, when I heard that the Kannapolis baseball team was going to be rebranding, I knew that the local community had such a close connection with the Intimidators brand because of that city's connection with Dale Earnhardt, which obviously we will talk about over the course of this podcast. So when I heard that the team was rebranding, I thought, this is going to get more pushback even than many other brands get. And so it had to be perfect, right? Like it had to be just an absolute great brand. And you guys and Dan Simon, to use a baseball expression, hit this one out of the park.
It was very intimidating when we realized we had to make a change, but we had the luxury of minor league baseball's long timelines, which really helped us get to know the community and really be able to get the community involved, which made a big difference, I think, in helping us hit it out of the park.
Well, and so let's start there. You said, that you realized you had to make a change. Temerity Baseball came in and purchased the Cannon Ballers a couple of years ago, and changes needed to be made. And this is, after the unfortunate, untimely passing of Dale Earnhardt, who was one of the previous team owners. So you couldn't use that Intimidators brand for lots of reasons, but you came in and you needed to rebrand. So can you sort of set the stage for how the conversation started that led to the Cannon Ballers?
Gosh, it's amazing how time flies in a pandemic and when you're having fun. But so we bought the team. We were excited to buy the team because it had such a rich history. But we also were excited to buy the team because we knew where it was going. We were already, bought the team days before we broke ground on a new ballpark. There was just a lot of momentum about how Kannapolis was changing, and we were cognizant that perhaps baseball needed to be pulled a little bit into the new era as well. So we bought the team, having real conversations about what the identity was going to be, learned quite a bit about how we were kind of handcuffed by the previous brand. And then it was really a moment of totally being overwhelmed, because when the sky's the limit, it's overwhelming. You're like, well, we can't be that brand anymore, but then what the heck are we going to be?
Right.
So we interviewed a number of designers, and we were totally new to minor league baseball. It wasn't just overwhelming because we could name ourselves the Unicorn Puff Puffs. It was overwhelming because no one in our organization had ever owned a minor league team, had never ever worked for a minor league team. It was sort of like, well, where do we go from here? So we talked to other owners and friends in the business, and about who to work with. And then we talked to, all of the kind of the best designers, people you talk to all the time, and interviewed them we settled on Dan because we were just so comfortable with his approach to baseball was similar to ours. And as you know, there's no one more fun to talk with for hours than Dan Simon, about all kinds of bizarre things. Like, did you know the button on the top of a baseball cap is called a squatchy?
I didn't know that. Did you learn that from Dan?
You learn all kinds of things from Dan if you have time. So, and when you're building a brand, it's really fun to dig into those details. So, starting to work with Dan, and at that point we were, a couple months into owning the team. We had spent quite a bit of time in Kannapolis, and we sat down with our full team and had a brainstorming session with Dan. And some of our team members had been there for years. Some had grown up. We've got two kids two young adults who had grown up in the area. So they got to kind of share where, where they'd gone on field trips. Like there was an old gold mine. So they're just panning the history of the area and the area itself for ideas. And Dan we came up with, hundreds of ideas, and probably there were 10 that he kind of put some pen to paper on. And then it was pretty clear kind of the top 3 or so. But it was still, throughout the process, it was very intimidating knowing that we had to go from such a, can I say the word badass on this podcast?
You sure can. Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. To go from such a badass brand that's associated with, the baddest of all no one had more swagger than Dale Earnhardt. To go from that and know that we had to come out with a brand that could replace that was really daunting. And it was pretty clear once Dan really started sketching that what became Boomer could be that guy.
Boomer, who you have referred to as your little guy.
Yes, my little guy. Just when Dan and I were trading boomers back and forth, looking at things like the color of the star on his head. When Boomer's flat and his little body and his big head, I just thought of him as my little guy.
You also, I have to say, Alicia, that you could not go with the unicorn puff puffs because the Utica unicorns already sort of have the unicorn
already have
market.
the corner on the unicorn market. Exactly.
So I remember from when we spoke for the sportslogos.net article that I wrote about this brand that, there was talk about how, the idea of cannons came up in the, name the team contest, and you wanted to avoid sort of like the militaristic, violence of cannons as a nickname. But can you talk about just sort of in general, the whole idea of cannons? Why are cannons?
Yeah.
Why is the word cannon associated with Kannapolis?
Kannapolis was created by the Cannon family. Kannapolis is Cannon Mills. They really built the town. They built the local hospital. They built the schools, the YMCA. If you drive around Kannapolis and Concord and really all of Cabarrus County, which is where we're located, you'll see references to the Cannons just everywhere. Honoring that legacy was important to most of the community. It was just, Kannapolis and the Cannons are synonymous. If you're from Kannapolis, you know who the Cannons are. That was important to us. But not only was it, a big weapon that's kind of hard to turn into, anthropomorphize a cannon. It's not the cutest thing you could do. And also a number of brands and teams have kind of been the Cannons, and they haven't. It's hard. It's a hard image to work with. So when Dan threw out this idea of the Cannon Ballers, it was like, whoa, the addition of the ERS really, really changes the game.
It does. I absolutely agree with that the whole notion of, because there's that double entendre of baller being sort of hey, I'll use the term since you've already used it. We've broken that seal. Sort of a badass person, right? Like if you're
right.
a baller, you're sort of a badass person.
And it has a baseball connotation. It's some people made fun of us like, oh, it's such a 90s word, want to be a baller. But it is still a sports phrase. It's something when you say the Ballers, you're not thinking of melon balls.
Right.
You're picturing some swagger. You're picturing probably an athlete. So and then it really gave us kind of 2 marks, which, as you know, how important it is to be able to have multiple marks and kind of takes on an identity to appeal to all different kinds of fans.
Absolutely. So you had this challenge of creating a brand that was going to replace the Intimidators. Dale Earnhardt, obviously beloved, and the community still mourning him. And this brand, has been just universally well received. Like I've never honestly, I've never met anyone who's like, Cannon Ballers, that's too much or that's goofy. And obviously the visual aspect of it, and I'll talk to Dan about this as well, but the visual aspect of it is really important. Like the character himself is really endearing, right? So, if it had been like the sort of super cool, like 90s yuppie version of what you'd think of when you think of baller, right? Like
right.
it would have been very different, but the character himself is super endearing. How big a role do you think that played in this brand being accepted the way it has been?
A huge role, I think, because if plenty of people heard the name and they were like, people can pick at anything. Everyone can be a critic, and you have to kind of have a tough skin. But then when you see Boomer, it's hard to say, God, I don't like that guy. He's whether you think he's cute because of that little body and the big head, or whether you think he's funny because of those goggles, or whether you just love that mustache. I think his actual face made a huge difference. And to Dan's credit, we went through a lot of faces, iterations of between the mustache and the mouth, and how much smile versus how much grimace. There was a lot of back and forth on that. And so perhaps it's just because I spent so much time looking at Boomer's mouth that I like to think Boomer's face made people like our brand. But I think that I think the character makes a huge difference.
You mentioned the mustache. The mustache feels like a reference. It feels like an homage to Dale Earnhardt. So you couldn't do a Dale Earnhardt brand, but that mustache feels pretty specific to me. Like that was a tribute to Dale Earnhardt.
Yeah, we wanted to have a little hat tip to people and things that were important in Cabarrus County. So, could we have had a handlebar mustache? I guess. But do people in Cabarrus County look at a handlebar mustache and think badass swagger? No, they look at a Dale mustache and think that is a mustache.
Right.
So we also, if you go deep into the Internet archives, Andy, the owner of the team, used to have a mustache. So he does have a preference for a Dale style mustache.
I see. So it's an homage to him as well, maybe.
I wouldn't say that, but I would say if he was going to draw a mustache, there's one kind of mustache that makes more sense to him than another.
Well, and so, I mean, in general, so the mustache specifically could be sort of Dale Earnhardt, but in general, the outfit that he's wearing, the helmet, the goggles, everything about him feels visually as close as you could get to a race car driver without actually being a race car driver.
Right. Well, and that's something we were really mindful of, just, the NASCAR connection in Cabarrus County overall. NASCAR, Cabarrus County is the heart of NASCAR racing. It's the Charlotte Motor Speedway is there. Most of the big names you can think of, if you can think of any in NASCAR, are around the area. So, when people were suggesting names, it was everything from the race cars to the speedsters to you name a take on racing iconography, and people thought it would be a good name. It's a very, I think that makes the area very unique. And did you know that Boomer, our actual mascot, we have Boomer's proper suit, which was designed by this great company, Custom Characters. And then we have Boomer's fire suit, the fireproof suit that race car drivers wear. So inherently something that's fireproof is pretty durable, which is important when you're sending a mascot into like elementary schools. So we learned quickly that our fancy suit was not super accommodating for dirty situations or high touch situations. So a local fire suit manufacturer made us some Boomer fire suits that will withstand 200 excited kids or anything else we throw at Boomer. So that tie-in is cool. It's it's an additional kind of local tie-in, and racing is declining in popularity, so we didn't want it to. Someone in Oregon is not going to buy a Boomer hat because of the race connections, but if people in the Charlotte area like that, that's great. That it makes sense to them.
Absolutely. Well, so you said, so when we spoke in 2019, one of the things that you told me then, and it's in the article that I wrote for sportslogos.net, that this brand needed to be local, unique, and fun. And it seems to me, I mean, well, obviously with the success of the brand since then, that you hit on all three of those. And I think those are things you just identified in what you were just describing, even just about Boomer himself, let alone the whole logo.
Thank you. Those are still our tenets when we think about anything we're doing in Kannapolis. And we were a little worried about the unique element because, a baseball headed character is not like the most unique thing you've ever seen, but we thought we made him special.
Sure. I mean, you have Mr. Met or Mr. Redlegs or Rosie
Right.
Red and Homer the Brave.
But
I mean,
you could put all of them side by side on, and actually one of my really dorky dreams would be to put all of them side by side on a baseball field together somewhere.
That would be kind of amazing,
really
actually.
Cool.
Yeah.
And you also would immediately know who was who.
Mhm.
They've all got big round heads, but that's kind of where the similarities end.
Right. Well, and only one of them has that mustache for sure there. So, it's like I said, I mean, I'm not just blowing smoke when I say it's one of my absolute favorite brands. I'm very appreciative of the time that you took to come on and talk to me about it. And I'm also appreciative of the team. Your social media folks, they follow me on Twitter, and I appreciate that. And they know that one of my things is that I collect ice cream helmets. And they also know they sent me one, not just because they know that I collect them, but Dan actually also designed the logo for my podcast. And so they said, we know that we're both Dan Simon fans, and so we're going to send you. So I've got one of the new Kannapolis Cannon Ballers helmets in the collection out here in the basement behind me.
Well, I like to think we have the best ballpark in the Carolinas, which hopefully by the time this airs, we'll have won the Ballpark Digest award. We'll see. But I definitely know we have the best staff in the Carolinas in minor league baseball, because they're a really, really good group of folks.
So speaking of that social media team, the Cannon Ballers are pretty easy to find on social media and online. But Alicia, where can folks find you and follow you on the socials, if that's something you do?
I am at Amling Am on Instagram. And my Twitter profile has gone way, way, way down since I left television news. In fact, that's one of the reasons I left TV news, is I wanted to spend less time on Twitter. So I do most of my social media on as Amling Am, but there's no better account to follow than the K Cannon Ballers, which that was one of our worries about the brand, is that it's just a lot of letters. Kannapolis Cannon Ballers, ton of letters, and we haven't been foiled too many places, but Instagram foiled us. So that's why we're the K Cannon Ballers.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking about the Cannon Ballers. This has been a blast.
Thanks for having me. Have a great day.
You too, Alicia.
And I love that you used "have a blast."
I didn't do it on purpose, but
it just makes sense when you're talking about cannons.
All right, everyone, welcome back. I'm super, super happy to be joined once again by my friend Dan Simon, who not only created the Kannapolis Cannon Ballers logo, but as you know, because I keep mentioning it, created the logo for this podcast, Baseball by Design, which I love so very, very much. Dan, thank you so much for being here to talk about the Kannapolis Cannon Ballers. This is a widely beloved creation of yours that has just been so much fun for minor league baseball, and the story behind it, the character you created, it's been such a blast for, as it were, minor league baseball fans. So yeah, thank you, Dan, for being here.
Hey, I'm glad to be back. Thanks for having me again.
This story is one that I really enjoy, just because it has a specific connection to this community, but the connection to the community obviously has nothing to do with cannonballs or even cannons. And so Alicia and I talked about this a little bit, but can you tell me from sort of your understanding how the idea of using cannons and a cannonballer came to pass for this team?
Well, the city of Kannapolis exists because of the Cannon family. James William Cannon, I guess that makes him the patriarch of the Cannon family. He founded the Cannon Manufacturing Company in Kannapolis way back in 1887. That later grew into the Cannon Mills, which was the largest textile mill in the South for a very long time. So he bought the land. James William Cannon did in shortly after the turn of the century, 1905, 1906, sometime around then. That and later started building the mill buildings that then became the town. There was no town at the time, and the reason it's named Kannapolis is because of the Cannon family and the Cannon mills. Kannapolis, that's the name for it. Now, the Cannon name begins with a C, just like the regular word cannon, and they specifically didn't spell it with a C because of the neighboring town of Concord that begins with a C. So just to differentiate it a little, they began it with a K. But that whole town existed because of the mill. So there's the mill is responsible for the building of the school there, the high school, the hospital, the downtown area. There's a theater that's still there called the Gem Theater. That was built for the entertainment of the people that worked in the mill. So for close to 100 years, starting in the early 1900s, that the people who lived in that city either worked in the mill, or worked at some business that supported the people that worked in the mill, from the grocery store to the YMCA to the movie theater I mentioned, to the restaurants, to the clothing stores, et cetera, et cetera. It was a city built for the mill.
So I think this is great because you got from a textile plant to a cannonball character. So there were some steps in between, obviously, there. And first of all, we should say, too, just to reiterate, this was an incredible challenge for you because the Intimidators nickname that they had for 2 decades before this was really widely beloved. And Dale Earnhardt Sr. owned the team. The nickname was based on him. And having to change that nickname after he passed away and the ownership changed, and there were legal reasons for the team to have to change their name. Being forced into changing a name that is widely beloved, named for a person who was widely beloved, is an extra challenge for you as a designer, because already you're dealing with people who, baseball fans who have an emotional attachment to a team, and there's emotional equity in this Intimidator's name. And so for you to come in and have to create a new nickname for reasons outside of the team's control, essentially, is an extra challenge for you as a designer. So it was, it's interesting how much research you did and how far back you got into the history of the town. So I'll say that as an aside. And then the next question I have, this is one of my long questions, Dan, it's how we work here. But the steps that you took to get from, okay, there was a family named Cannon Mills was the name of a textile plant that the city was built up around. And so then there was conversation about like, okay, let's do something with cannons. How did you get from the sort of the weaponry of cannons to this character who, and we can talk about this a little bit, looks a little bit like Dale Earnhardt?
Put a pin in that question, because let me quickly address something that you prefaced that question with. When you mentioned that there were legal reasons they had to change the name, that's not often the case with a baseball team, that you have to change the name for legal reasons. Now, as far as the legality of it goes, please understand, listeners, that this never went to court. It wasn't a court case, but the Kannapolis Intimidators were named after, as you mentioned, Dale Earnhardt, who was born in and grew up in and still lived in up until his untimely death in a crash, I believe in the Daytona 500 in Kannapolis. And he is the proverbial native son. And he is indeed beloved in Kannapolis, was and still is. And his nickname was the Intimidator. And he was one of the owners of the baseball team. He had actually just joined the ownership group, or put together the ownership group that bought the team, I believe. And he never got to see a game played by the team named after him because unfortunately his death was, I think, just a couple of months before opening day of what would have been the first season of the Intimidators. So the team is named after him. That is his nickname. His estate owns the rights to, obviously, his likeness, his name, and his nickname. Though they gave permission to the team to continue using the name Intimidators, the team did not own the rights to that name. And that kept them, that hamstrung them to a certain degree with regard to some of the things they could do. Frankly, just some of the things from a marketing perspective that all teams, major or minor league, need to do, they didn't have full control over. They would have had to get permission to do certain things. And it was just not a tenable situation moving forward. They kept that name for, I don't know how many years after his death, but it got to the point where they needed their own ownable name and identity. So that's the legal part of it. Now back to your question about how we got from cannon mills and the idea of cannons to cannon ballers. When the team did a name the team contest prior to us developing this identity, one of the most popular submissions, popular as far as number goes, was cannons, the Kannapolis Cannons. And that was seriously considered by the team. One of the things that I suggested to them, recommended to them, was that they not name the team Cannons for several reasons. The main reason is a cannon is a weapon of war. And in today's day and age, you don't want your team to be named after weapons that kill people. So that was the main reason. The other reason was there have been minor league teams in the affiliated minor leagues named the Cannons. There was the Prince William Cannons. There was the Calgary Cannons. There are some collegiate teams named the Cannons. And there's what's been done with cannons from a graphic standpoint, from a brand identity standpoint, it's kind of already been done. And there's not necessarily new ground to be broken in that regard. So that was another reason I tried to dissuade them from going with the name Cannons. But I realized how much the name Cannons means to the community, resonated with the community. And I wanted to try to figure out some way to perhaps still work that in somehow. I was thinking of, well, if we don't name it after the cannon itself, what else could we name it after? And I thought, well, a cannon shoots cannonballs. So I'm thinking, okay, the cannonballs, still a weapon of destruction. And then I'm thinking, wait a second, there are cannon ballers. Now, my first thought was somebody jumping into a swimming pool, like in The Sandlot, the great Hambino, Hamilton. He jumps into the swimming pool and yells "Cannonball!" and
that would have been a great baseball connection there too.
Right. So that was my first thought. Then I was thinking about, well, you've got, like in the movie, the Cannonball Run. If anyone doesn't know, it's like a coast to coast road race called the Cannonball Run. Later led to that movie of the same name. And somebody, I'm trying to think of who it was. It might have been Ben Hill, who does the Ben's Biz blog on minorleaguebaseball.com, majorleaguebaseball.com too, who thought it would be great that every time a runner crossed the plate for Kannapolis, the PA announcer would say, "That's another cannonball run." But
that sounds like something Ben Hill would say.
Those were that's what I originally thought of. And those are genuine possibilities. And then it just hit me, wait a second, human cannonball. You know, minor league baseball is often described as having somewhat of a carnival or circus atmosphere with all the fun and all the hijinks and all the between innings promotions and things like that. And I'm thinking, well, a human cannonball, that's the types of events that the human cannonball would appear at in circuses and at carnivals and things like that. Perfect tie-in, create this whole carnival atmosphere, look and feel to the brand identity, and you're talking minor league baseball.
Mm-hmm. So you create this character who is a human cannonball, and I think, you know, people really take to this character just because there's something really endearing about the big head and the little body, and, you know, the sort of look on his face. And but this character is not just a human cannonball, I think, but he's got, you know, obviously human cannonballers are going to wear helmets, they're going to wear goggles, but between the helmet and the goggles and the mustache, looks a little bit not just race car driverish, which is an important part of that community, but that mustache looks familiar to fans of Dale Earnhardt, I would say.
I never noticed that before.
Did you not?
The reality is, for the same legal reasons that we alluded to earlier in this conversation, this identity could not feature Dale Earnhardt. But if the character could capture the spirit of what Dale Earnhardt represented, somebody who left it all out on the track, somebody who lived life on the edge, all of those things, if this character could reflect that aspect of Dale Earnhardt, then we can capture what it means so much to this community, the favorite son, Dale Earnhardt. And so the fact that he's wearing a helmet that looks very much like a race car driver's helmet, that's what the human cannonball is wearing anyway. The mustache, the fact that it reminds people of Dale Earnhardt, maybe it is a little bit more than a coincidence. Maybe it's just coincidence. So there are similarities, some intentional, some coincidental.
I do want to, I just because I love this story so much, I want to wrap up this conversation about the work that you did on the logo, just because I love this story so much, and it speaks to the reaction that the logo got when it was first unveiled. Would you mind telling the story about the sort of unique way that the team unveiled the new logo and how it was received?
Well, sure. One of the things that I'd like to say about the ownership group, Temerity Capital Partners, I believe is the name of the main group. Temerity Baseball is their baseball offshoot. They now are owners of two teams, both the Kannapolis Cannon Ballers and the Greensboro Grasshoppers. And they do everything right. They're not from Kannapolis. They're DC based, Washington, DC based. And it was important to them when they came in not to be these out of town owners who just come in and do what they want with no consideration of what the community wants. What the community wanted was of paramount importance to them. One of the things Alicia did was set up meetings with a host of people in the community, from season ticket holders to business leaders to the mayor to people who worked for the Chamber of Commerce, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the big questions that I I needed answered going into all of those meetings was, does this community want an identity based on things from the past, specifically the mill, or did they want to put that in the past, so to speak, or literally, and come up with an identity that's something new, something moving forward? And what I was expecting when I left Kannapolis after the several days I was there that I would have the answer to that question. But what I got surprised the heck out of me, which was, it was basically, I didn't keep an actual tally, but it was basically split 50-50. Something definitely based on the mill and something new versus something new moving forward. And when I was on my flight going home, I was actually sitting there thinking, I don't know what to do. There's no way I can win here, because half of the people want it one way, half of the people want it the other. We're going to disappoint half of the people and please the other half. But either way, I kind of looked at it as a no-win situation. And I was racking my brain trying to think of, is there any way to come up with something that references and recognizes the past while also moves forward and wasn't stuck in the past? And that ended up being this Cannon Ballers identity. It referenced the mill, it referenced Dale Earnhardt, yet it wasn't a mill identity and it wasn't a racing identity. It was something new that they did not previously have. So when you talk about this was an identity that resonated with a lot of people, that's the reason it resonated with the community, because everybody felt like their voices were heard. So with their unveiling, I've been to a number of unveilings. This one was a little different than anyone I previously attended. And what they did was, I had mentioned earlier, the Gem Theater, which still exists in Kannapolis. It's been completely refurbished. It's one of those theaters, I can't tell you the exact day year it opened, but it harks back to the days when you did not have multiplexes, when you would have one beautiful single screen theater that showed one movie at a time. And they still have that one downtown. And at the theater, they were going to have what they called the big reveal. Now, the theater seats, if I'm not mistaken, 800 people. And that's a pretty good showing if you can get 800 people to show up at your unveiling. And the tickets were not for sale. They were free, but you had to sign up for them in advance. And they quickly sold out. So what they realized was, we have way more people that want to see this than we have room for here. So what they did was, they decided to extend this out to the street area around the theater. And they put up big projection screens. They then had circus performers doing all kinds of acts outside prior to the actual event. And when I say the event was a video inside the theater that was then simulcast on these screens outside the theater with all these people gathered around. So 800 people inside the theater seemed like at least as many people outside as there were inside. And I was saying how the Temerity Capital, the ownership group of the team, does things right. They had a 20-minute video done by these two guys from Kannapolis, Market Street Video, did a great job that talked about the history of Kannapolis, the history of baseball in Kannapolis, the development of the identity. They actually flew those guys out here to Louisville to interview me to be part of the video about the development of the identity. They interviewed fans at the previous ballpark and put together this 20-minute video where that was shown at the Gem Theater, simulcast outside, and that was their big reveal with these circus acts and everything else that went along with it. It was really a spectacle, and the people loved it.
Well, and if I remember correctly, when you told me this story previously, that you attended that event and people recognized you from having been in the video and were thanking you for the work that you did in creating the logo for the team. And so it was, that story of graphic designer as hero really sort of, touches my heart right there, because I
Well,
think it's
hero might be a little hyperbolic, but
not on this podcast.
with regard to what you were just saying, one of my big concerns going in, I loved the identity before it was unveiled. I honestly did not know how it would be received. I was very proud of the work, but my biggest concern was that even though, as we've discussed, there were intentional and coincidental references to or suggestions of Dale Earnhardt, I knew how important Dale Earnhardt was to these people. I knew they wished they could have kept the Intimidators name as the name of their city's baseball team. And I did not know if when they saw this identity, they were going to see all of these things that we intended, but meant to be suggestive and not literal. Mm-hmm. And at one point during the video, I mentioned that, they talked about the history of the city, of the mill. And there was also a part of it about Dale Earnhardt in the video, about Dale Earnhardt specifically. And when that part came, it erupted in applause. They were thrilled that their favorite son was on screen. And I was sitting there thinking, oh no, they love this guy even more than I already knew. Well, at the very end of the video, when they unveiled the logo in the video, again, the theater erupted in applause and literally chills ran up my spine. I've never had that experience, certainly with an identity I've created, to have chills run up my spine, but it was because they saw it. They saw what we intended, and they loved it. And when I was walking out of the theater, like you said, people coming into the theater, nobody knew who I was. However, as I was walking out, clearly some people had recognized me from having just been in the video they just watched. And a number of people stopped me and thanked me. And this wasn't about being a hero. What could have happened with this is somebody from the outside comes in, and that person from the outside, and not just the person, not just the designer, but this ownership group, come in and do what they want, what they would do if it was up to them, without necessarily caring about what the community cares about. That's all we cared about, was how can we do something that resonates with the community? And when those people thanked me for that, it meant more to me than anything else could have, because this was not about national merchandise sales. This was not about what people in California or New Jersey or Kansas or wherever thought about it, and whether they're going to buy merchandise, or whether it's going to be go viral on social media. It was about what this meant to the community, and the fact that these people were thanking me meant so much to me, because we did what was right for them.
Well, I love this story so much, and it just speaks to, the how well that was received in that moment has obviously continued on, and it's one of the most popular logos out there, one of my favorite logos, and so I'm certainly glad that we've had the chance to talk about it. Dan, thank you so much once again. I always enjoy these conversations. I look forward to our next conversation. Obviously, people, as always, if you don't know this already from listening to this podcast, you should. You can find Dan online at studiosimon.net. And on Instagram, I think it's studio_Simon on Instagram. And we're going to get Dan on Twitter one of these days, but not. That's going to be a big moment. It's like we're going to break Twitter when we finally get you on Twitter.
Well, on a separate call, I want you to tell me more about this Twitter thing.
Thank you, Dan. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks. Bye, Paul.
All right, everyone, welcome back. This is such a thrill for me right now, like literally a thrill, because I am talking to David the Bullet Smith. David the Bullet Smith holds 6 Guinness World Records in the field of human cannonballing. And so David's outside right now. You can hear that because that's David's MO right now, right? There's the whatever the next adventure is, David's on the way right now. But so David he's been a human cannonballer for 22 years, more than 8,000 cannon shots in 15 different countries. And among the world records, the highest human cannonball and the longest human cannonball, 195 feet. So 195 feet, that's a shallow fly ball right there, right? Like that's a decent distance in baseball terms.
It really is. That's pretty long shot.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously David is here right now. We're talking to the real human cannonball in an episode about the Kannapolis Cannon Ballers. So I just, if I first, David, thank you so much for being here and agreeing to come talk to me for the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's such a thrill. It's such a thrill for me. I get to have such interesting conversations with this podcast. So I never thought I would get to talk to David the Bullet Smith, holder of 6 Guinness World Records. So yeah. I know that this is a family business for you. I mean, you must get the question all the time. How did you get into being a human cannonball? I know it's a family business, but can you tell me, how did human cannonballing become a family business for you?
Well, my dad started it for our family. He had, his mom and dad had regular jobs. His father was a police officer and grandma was a teacher. And, he went through college as a gymnast, got wrapped up in the circus, believe it or not, ran away at the circus with my mother, through that gymnastics background, and, became flying trapeze artists. They took that was their entrance into the entertainment world. And then they went really, really far with that, kind of came to a crescendo of winning the Circus World Championships in London, England, the year before I was born. And then my dad built a cannon. And in my memory, my father has always been a human cannonball. So like I've been walking on net since I was just figuring out how to walk, and it's been something that I've just always seen my dad broke the world record when I was a kid, bringing it home for the first time. My daddy's the best. And then just kind of when I was 19, I basically bought a cannon from my dad and took it out on the road and took it out of the circus for the most part. And here I am in concerts and festivals and all kinds of weird stuff. We do a lot of commercials. I love it when I get to do a circus. And we sure have blown up in baseball.
That is for sure. First of all, are you a baseball fan? Do you have a baseball team?
You know what? I don't have a baseball team at the moment. I have such a neat experience with so many teams, that I'm happy to be there. I love kind of watching everybody, all my friends that I've gotten to know in the business, from the announcers that we work on the floor with the guys up in the press box, and of course the general managers and entertainment directors and things like that. So there's certain places that I love. I don't know how many teams we've done now. Probably, yeah. I don't know, probably 40, something like that. Okay. Well, most of them repeat.
So the reason I ask about, your connection to baseball is because I'm curious, as a human cannonballer, the Kannapolis Cannon Ballers, they have a mascot who's a little guy, and you've performed at the Cannon Ballers, obviously. So you know this. They've got a little guy with a big baseball head, kind of like Mr. Met as a human cannonballer. First of all, do you think that giant head would be a problem for him as an actual human cannonballer, or would it help?
Well, all I know is I got kind of a little pinhead, and I'm a pretty good cannonball, so I wouldn't think it would necessarily be a good thing to have a big head like that. No, right. He's not exactly the right shape to get shot out of the cannon, and he might get caught up in the cape a little bit. As much as I'd love to have a cape, it's not a great idea.
I can see that, absolutely. But I've seen the videos and the pictures of you human cannonballing, and you both have the helmet and the goggles, so you both have that going on.
Oh, he's just well, he's got to be my favorite mascot now, obviously.
How could he not?
Yeah, that was when I heard that. I got an invitation email that announcing that they're going to change their baseball team to the Kannapolis Cannon Ballers, I was like, oh, how perfect. So that was obviously a shoe-in for us. I had an instant connection and tie-in to, an interest in being a part of their program.
Of course. So as a cannonballer, what are the skills that you need to have to be a successful? I mean, you mentioned, I don't think that you have a pinhead. I don't think that's a fair characterization. But what are the skills that you have to be a human cannonballer?
Well, you got to have some physical attributes. It's your body adapts over years of doing something, and mine has adapted to being able to sustain just enormous amount of pressure for a split second, which is kind of, I can't tell whether it's best to be more of a marathon sprinter physique or a power lifter physique for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've gone back and forth in the way I've trained it and things like that. So, it's definitely a strong core and all that. You got to protect yourself and remain flexible. And basically, though, I think it's a dedication to the job that you've got to have, mathematical aptitude 1000%, even though that's mathematically incorrect right there. But I live and die, hopefully don't die, by my ability to make calculations that are sometimes scary.
Yeah.
And so if your conditions change, as the day goes on and we start the day thinking it's going to be nice and sunny, and then we get wind and cold, or I plan for wind and cold and it becomes nice and sunny or something. The cannon's a ever changing thing. No two shots are the same, even in the power settings, unless conditions align again, and there's a lot of conditions that go into that. So I think to do big cannon shots like I'm doing, I don't think there's a way to get there unless you've got experience and time, because the experience allows you to make those decisions. And if you don't have that, you don't make very many of those successfully, so, and the consequences are dire. So
for sure,
you got to have a love to travel. We're always on the road, a heck of a work ethic. You got to show up ready to go, ready to put on a show with a lot of times with people that have no idea what they've hired even. They see the videos and everything, but the actual process of putting this on, it's amazing to me how much work goes into a 5-second cannon shot. We've spent a year planning and doing things like that and shipped it to the other side of the world, shot once and come back.
Oh my gosh.
And so I mean, baseball's kind of nice because it's I've got it kind of cookie cuttered in as far as the setup and how to take care of the field and how to present our stuff as well as possible. So that's really nice. Is once we figured that out initially with some of the teams that believed in us early on, trust me, when I started calling, it was on a whim that I got into this baseball. And I just thought, there's so many teams out there and it's such a neat crowd. I get to meet people. I get to be up close to them, even though we're presented out on the field. It does feel like it's a tight connection to my audience. And as an entertainer, I love that. I really like that crowd.
So when you're performing at a baseball stadium or at a ballpark, where are you launching from and where do you land relative to the baseball field?
Okay, so we put the cannon out behind second base. And I've made some adaptations to the cannon shots and things over the years to really cater to baseball. Now, depending on the grounds manager and what they think and how the weather and the lay of the ground is, most of the time they like for me to keep the cannon on the hard infield dirt. So that means when I first started doing this, I was putting it out in center field, popping probably 150 to 160 feet high at like 45 degrees or something like that. I mean, 150 to 160 feet long at like 45 degrees, keeping the cannon on the grass, shooting to home plate. I basically land my net set up and I basically aim right for home plate. And that way I've got a cookie cutter for each ballpark. But as I've I realize I don't want to be out on the grass for these ballparks. It's not worth the extra time and effort for the audience in the show to plywood back and so that we can park this cannon out on the grass and hope we don't hurt something. So I bring it right back to the edge of the dirt, brace it down, and I get to do about 130-foot cannon shot, 140-foot cannon shot, depending on where the back of the, the back wall is where what determines how far I can put the net away, and I just started pointing it up steeper and steeper. So I think the crowd actually likes it better. So now I'm doing like 130, 140, whatever it comes out to at the max there. And, but I'm shooting it like 60 degrees. So I am way up in the air.
So the crowds react to the height rather than the distance.
They always have.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to have distance to have height too, but
sure.
But the cannon shot has not suffered at all by catering to the ballpark. It just took me a couple of years to figure it out.
Sure. So as you were describing the attributes that a person has to be a successful human cannonballer, I was wondering to myself, what position would a human cannonballer play on the baseball team? If we got the little guy actually on the baseball team, and I'm thinking with everything you described, I'm thinking probably center field, right? Like you've got to have that initial burst to when you see the ball off the bat, you've got to have that initial burst. And then you've got to understand the trajectory of the ball. You've got to have the math to understand where the ball is going to land and how to get there. You have to have the physical ability to actually, the courage to actually, dive for a ball if you need to. And then, just like you said, the repetition and the experience. I mean, there's no better way to get better at field and fly balls than to just do it a billion times, And so I think dedication to the craft. So I think our little Kannapolis Cannonballer guy would be a center fielder on a baseball team. So that was just sort of what was going through my head while you were talking about that there.
If not the ball.
Well, you're thinking more abstractly than I did. I hadn't actually thought of that. So I'm obviously I can't let you get out of here without asking you this question. Can you, and I know you've been asked this a billion times, and I apologize for asking you something you've been asked many times before, but can you describe the physical sensation of, from beginning to end of getting, that initial burst shot out of the cannon, launched up into the air, and then the arc, and then the descent onto the big inflatable mat that you hopefully have positioned correctly after all of your calculations?
I can give it a whirl. It's a tough one to relate to, but so I'm listening to the countdown and I'm in a position that's very aggressive in a strong stance because I'm actually in a stand more than a lay down position because of the steeper firing angles. So it is more aggressive as a stand up. It's hard to get ready for some if you're too low. I don't feel as like my body can take as big of a hit. And so what I'm anticipating is that there's going to be a very short little movement that's going to give me, well, you just feel it now. I can feel when it's about to go. And then I go from, I think I'm tight to finding out whether I was or not. I mean, so I have this weight on my body that hits as I accelerate. I'll push 10 G's on most cannon shots. And that's not guessing. That's measured by the Air Force Base for a Discovery Channel documentary. So 10 G's on takeoff is what my average is, I would say. And as that weight hits, I become heavy. I feel my shoulders get pulled down. I try to be on the balls of my toes just a little bit now because I feel it gives me a little bit more cushion in my joints to let the cannon squash my toed stance to a flat-footed stance and then feel the weight hit the hips, the knees, the ankles, every muscle in your body and hope that they all stand straight. And all that happens about as fast as you can blink. And then I'm out of the cannon. And first thing for me is usually, spot my target. And after all the years in my acrobatic, I know if I'm having a good flight or a bad flight right away. So if I'm having a bad flight, it's save my ass, whatever I got to do, try and get straight and true by the top of the flight, because that's when you have this little weightlessness where you can make the corrections and things.
Oh.
And it feels like most of the shots I do nowadays feel like a straight up and a straight down more than a go closer. I don't feel closer till the net until I'm looking down at it from 70, 80 feet high. That's how it looks from my perspective. And then hopefully I'll most of the time I come out pretty good, and I just go straight out, go up to the top, spot my target, and I wait for that weightlessness to get in, and then start to control my dive. And it is a head dive now, at least on most of these high ones, where I'll be up there 80 feet high sometimes, and looking down at that net, and you accelerate so quickly as you fall, and the difference in impact speed hitting a net from 50 feet to 80 feet is like just mathematically much more. So that's what I'm doing. I get ready, I come in, and through the flight, it's weightlessness. There's no pressure on my body anywhere, but I know when I hit that net, my body better be in a position to stop me from 70 miles an hour to 0 in somewhere between 6 and 9 feet, and be able to do that day after day after day. So it's, there's a lot of impact. The net actually has more impact than the cannon, physical G's.
Interesting.
And it does. It does. The barrel's longer than the landing.
Well, I'm pretty sure I just held my breath through that entire story, by the way. I was living it with you there. I was like, holy smokes.
I was trying to put you in my shoes.
Oh my gosh. Well, this has been a total blast, as it were. And I really appreciate you coming on and joining me and sharing your experience as a human cannonballer. I mean, there's such a fun connection to the Kannapolis team. Where can people find you online, and where can people find you in person? Where are you going to be performing here later in the summer?
Our website is humancannonball.us. You can see a lot of our bigger videos. We don't update that as quick as, say, for instance, Facebook. If you find us on Facebook at David the Bullet Smith AGT, we just put up our remainder of the year calendar. We just put it up a couple days ago there. I don't know if it's on the website yet, but it will be soon.
That is perfect. And this has been so much fun. And I really appreciate your time. And best of luck. Stay safe. And I hope to see you break your own record once again. You've already broken your own record 4 times. So we'll look forward to seeing you break your own record. Let me ask you, the record right now is 195. Is 200 within reach?
200's in reach. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll save 200 for something big.
All right.
Though they are big, but I worked my way up there. And then we set the height record in Saudi Arabia for 89 feet high.
Holy smokes.
That was a big one. Yeah.
That just sent
of all
shivers
the
through my
local
body.
places, right? Yeah. So anyway, thank you for getting us out there in front of baseball again. I love that. I love that crowd, and I look forward to going out to the ballparks here. So
very much my pleasure. Thank you so much, David. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. All the best.
All right. Take care.